Okay, good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Pamela Thomas, and you are here for Online with the CMC. And this morning, Heidi Margold, who is our newest cataloger, is going to be presenting The Good, the Bad, and the Just Plain Weird, a short guide to cataloging oddly bound books. So take it away, Heidi.
All right, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Since I am the newest member of the CMC and have been working from home most of this time, I wanted to turn my camera on and say hi to everybody. It's nice to meet you all virtually. So I want to start out by thanking you all for attending my presentation today. I'm so excited to be presenting on this topic. I love talking about the physical structure of the book. While I'll try to not get too far into the nitty-gritty, I'm hoping by the end of this presentation, everyone has a basic vocabulary for describing some structures and where to record that within their MARC records. Just to give you a little background on myself, I have a fine arts degree with a focus on textile art that I received from Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville. This is where my love of book structures began. From there, I attended University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana and received my Master's of Library and Information Sciences. I focused mostly on preservation and conservation during my graduate studies. So why am I a cataloger? Well, I believe that one of the most important parts of preserving information is to be able to find that information. This means that creating correct and well-rounded records is extremely important. I'm going to turn off my camera now. I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentation. What do I mean by oddly bound materials? Now that you know a little bit about me and why I picked this topic, let me start by talking about what I mean by oddly bound materials. Today, when discussing oddly bound materials, I'm specifically thinking about materials that are physical and bound in a way that is out of the normal. More on this later. Another related topic is materials that are bound out of order. Maybe the pagination is inconsistent or it is a set of volumes but improperly bound. By the end of this presentation, I plan to go field by field through an example record that will be created as the presentation progresses. We will be focusing on these fields: the 264 field, 500, 505, 563, and the 655, because I find these are the most important when talking about this topic. So here's a brief definition of each. The 264 is a statement relating to the publication, printing, distribution, issue, release, or production of a work. The 500, a note that provides general information for which a specialized note field has not already been defined. 505 is a formatted contents note. Contents notes may be encoded at one of two levels, basic or enhanced. The use of enhanced 505 notes is strongly encouraged to provide the level of detail allowed by RDA instructions. The 563 is a note about binding information for primarily antiquarian materials, rare books, and other special collections. Do not use for serials bound together after publication for shelving and storage purposes. A 655 field, a term indicating the form, genre, and/or physical characteristics of the materials being described. This field is what the item is, while a 650 describes what an item is about. Binding terms to review. There are many binding styles, but I'm going to cover just a few today. We will review the terms for library books that we all see day to day so that we can distinguish between the traditional book and specially bound items. The three other types of books I want us to take a look at are pop-up, Coptic Binding, and accordion style books. Also under accordion style, we'll cover tunnel books and flag books. The case binding. I'm going to outline the two most common book structures that are made today, the case binding and the perfect binding. This is an example, the image is an example of a case-bound book. The book is broken down into three major parts, which are the text block, end sheets, and the case. The text block is made up of signatures, which are either sewn, glued, or sewn and glued together. This next image outlines what a signature is. Signatures are made up of 4 or more pages that are then folded to the correct size. Signatures are stacked and make up the text block. The text block is then attached to the end sheet, which are connected in the back by a gauze strip. From here, the end sheets are attached to the case, which is usually built out of 2 boards that are covered with cloth, paper, or some other material of the binder's choice. This binding choice is usually more expensive than a perfect binding, but still commonly used and found. That brings us to the perfect binding. This is the quickest and most affordable way to bind books. It looks very similar to the case binding, but with some major differences. The text block is made up of loose sheets instead of signatures. The loose sheets are lined up and then glued together with a double fan adhesive technique. Once the sheets are glued together, the text block is inserted into the cover and spine with another layer of adhesive. You will frequently have break points at the spine with time because the adhesive will become brittle and crack with use. In addition to the spine splitting, you may also have pages fall out. Both the case binding and the perfect binding are so commonly found that including binding information in our MARC records is not necessary. The reason I am showing you these bindings is to help differentiate our common styles of books from our oddly bound materials. Pop-up. Well, let's get into the odd or more unique items. This is the pop-up book, Trail by David Pelham. Why am I bringing up pop-up books? For the most part, pop-up books also utilize the case binding style, but the inside of the book is what's worth mentioning here. Pop-up books are made with a variety of materials on the inside, and usually there is some interaction between the reader and the item itself. You would also want to include pop-up book information in your 655 genre terms, as well as in a 500 note. I will go over the genre terms later in the presentation. Coptic binding. This is an example of a Coptic style bound book. It is made up of 2 book boards and folded signatures as the text block. The unique part of the Coptic bound structure is that the boards and the text block are sewn all together during the binding process. When we compare this book structure to the case binding, the biggest difference is that the text block is sewn separately and then attached to the case, whereas this structure is completely done all at one time. In general, this is a very strong structure and the book can lay completely flat when opened. One of the downfalls of this style of binding is if the sewing structure is damaged, the whole book will fall apart easily and need to be completely resewn. The example I'm showing here is a pretty traditional sewing structure, but you will often find intricate designs on the spine for the sewing structure. Accordion binding. This is an example of an accordion style book. This is one of my favorite structures because of its flexibility. Typically, a long sheet of paper is folded in an accordion style to achieve this look, and sometimes you will find multiple sheets glued together to achieve an extremely long book. In this example, the ends of the accordion are attached to the boards that are wrapped in a cloth. The wonderful part about this book structure is that you can enjoy it in many ways. You can still turn the pages in a traditional manner, see the example on the left, or it can be experienced as more of a sculptural piece, see the example on the right. It is also frequently used in making up other book structures like a flag book or a tunnel book, which I will show you a little bit more later. Here's a real-world example of the use of an accordion binding in a book format. I don't have rights to this video. It was put together by Otis College of Arts and Design. You will find the original video link in the presentation notes. This video doesn't have any audio, so I'll kind of walk you through what's happening. So it's a cell phone that's being removed from a case. On the back of the cell phone, there's a closure. Once opened, it reveals an accordion folded book. It's then put back into the case of the phone. Here's a real-world example of the use of an accordion binding to create a flag book. Again, I don't have rights to the video. It was put together by Otis College of Arts, and you can find the link in the presentation notes at the end. So this one has a look of initially a standard book, but you notice the pages are a little bit odd. So the individual is just flipping through the pages. And then I'll try and pause it just at the right time. So what will happen is they'll pick up the book and then open it. And that's the flags right there. And then I'm going to pause it one more time. And if you look at the top, you can see the accordion structure makes up the back binding. So that's how they achieve the flag structure that they have there. And it closes. So here is an artist book example that I'm going to cover in today's presentation. This is called Memory Loss by Scott Mccartney, who has a website with information on each piece, which makes the cataloging process much more straightforward. Here's a little bit of information about this piece. It's created in 1988. It's 6 by 56 centimeters, 40 pages. It's part of an offset edition of 500, and it was produced by Visual Studios Workshop Press. Memory Loss was inspired by a traumatic brain injury suffered by the artist's brother in 1986. The accordion structure combines fractured images and texts drawn from medical literature about head injury with personal photographs and correspondence. I'm going to play a video to help us understand the handling and build of this item. This also does not have any audio, so I'll do my best to walk you through what's happening. He's already untied the book, so you're able to open it. This is what I was referring to earlier as a really long book. So he has multiple pages that are glued together at the fold points. And you can see this individual is combining different pages to see different effects. And eventually, he will close the item, and then he's going to go page by page. So you can see, you can experience this as a sculptural piece or a turn page piece. So where would we begin to catalog this item? An interesting but not surprising aspect of this piece is that it does not contain a title page or publishing information printed on the item. Typically, artists do not include this information physically on their pieces. So in our case, we are lucky that so much of the information is provided on the website. The next few slides will go over cataloging this item using the fields discussed earlier. Let's start out with the 264 field. On the left of the slide, you will find a screen grab of the publication information taken directly from the artist's website. Because the information is not physically present as part of the item, we will be using brackets to indicate the information is implied, but no question marks since the information is supplied by the artist. Also keep in mind the dimensions provided are in inches, but when cataloging, we use centimeters. So here's the breakdown of the field. 264, first indicator blank and second indicator 1, since this is the publication information. Subfield A for the place of publication. I was able to find that Visual Studios Workshop Press is based in Rochester, New York, so we will use open bracket, Rochester, New York, close bracket. Subfield B for the name of the publisher, which would be open bracket, Visual Studios Workshop Press, close bracket. Then we would include subfield C for the date of publication, which is 1988. Because we only have the publication date, we would not include a second 264 field with a copyright notice. Our 264 field is completed and we will move on to our 500 fields. to use a 500 or a 563. Making the decision to use the 500 or 563 field comes down to cataloger's judgment. As mentioned on a previous slide, the 563 field is intended to describe binding information for antiquarian materials, rare books, and other special collections. In this case, I went back and forth on whether to code this as a 500 or 563 note. What it came down to for me was that the item wasn't antiquarian and only 500 were made. However, you could have chosen to include this information in the 563 field. I put the example of both options on the slide for reference. 500, both indicators blank, subfield A, folded accordion style. Binding is made up of end boards with a single cord laced through the front and back covers. The 563 will be coded the same way with the same information. This brings us to the 655, the genre form field. Using a Library of Congress controlled vocabulary here is critical. Ideally, we would want to list the binding type as part of the genre, but unfortunately, accordion binding is not part of the Library of Congress controlled vocabulary for genre form terms. So in the case of this book, the artist book that we were referring to earlier, I would select the genre as artist books. For the sake of the presentation though, I would like to give a couple more examples of bindings as the genre form field. Tunnel books and flag books are both book types that utilize the accordion fold technique. I wanted to show an example of a tunnel book, so on the left of the slide, you will see Andrea Dezos' Ancestor's Garden. On each side of the book, you will see the accordion style folding, which holds the structure of the book together. This artist has created layers of imagery by cutting paper and connecting the two accordion sides together. I wanted to showcase an example of a tunnel book being assembled. This is Andrea Dezos in the studio assembling a tunnel book. Notice the books in the background as well as the one she is actively working on. You will see the accordion structure that holds the pages together and the depth that is created with the imagery. Again, I don't have rights to the video, and I do have the video link in the presentation comments you can get at the end. So what's happening here is she is creating the imagery that will create the look of her book. I'm going to pause it right here. So where she is placing the imagery on the right side, that is the accordion fold. I also want to note on the left side of the screen in the video, you will see 3 other books that she's in the process of assembling, and you'll see the accordion styles on each side of those books. And again, she's just choosing her imagery, but it gives you a good idea of how these books get put together with the structures I've talked about. All right, that brings us to the 505. Have you ever come across an item that is bound out of order or has a missing volume? We would want to utilize our 500 and 505 fields for that. In my first example, this is an example of a book that has a missing volume. So I'll start by describing the 505. So 505, first indicator 2 for partial contents, second indicator blank for basic level. Then all the volume information would be described in subfield A. In my example, this item only has volume numbers. If the parts of your volume sets have individual titles, you would want to do an enhanced contents note and use appropriate subfields. Notice in the example that volume 3 is missing. So I have volume 1, dash dash, volume 2, dash dash, volume 4. I would want to include a 500 field to indicate that the book is missing volume 3. So in my example, I have 500, subfield A, book is missing volume 3. Example number 2. This is an example of a book that is bound out of order. So starting with the 505, we have 505, first indicator 0 for complete contents and second indicator blank for basic level. Like the previous example, all the volume information will be stored in delimiter A. List the same order that the item is bound. In this case, we have volume 1, volume 2, volume 4, then volume 3. Note that the item is bound out of order in the 500 note. So in my 500, I have 500, both indicators blank. Subfield A, book is bound with volume 4 before volume 3. This is the record containing all of the fields and examples we covered today. They don't all necessarily relate to the same item, but I wanted to show you what it would look like in connection, and that the 655 fields are also controlled. So at this time, I'll open it up for any questions. You feel free to type in your questions in the comments, or you can also turn your mic on.
Well, they can unmute themselves now because I
Sorry.
gave them the power.
Yes,
okay.
Now you can unmute yourselves.
Sorry, I had to find where it was. We don't have any questions yet, but Sherry just pointed out that there should be a correction on the slide, the publication slide. The date in subfield C should also be in brackets.
Oh, good catch, Sherry. I don't know why I didn't think to do that. I will correct that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Heidi will correct that, and she'll put this presentation on L2 as well. So you can look at the slides after the presentation. So does anybody have any questions about anything that Heidi covered? You can either type in the chat box or you can unmute yourself and ask your question. And I'm just going to put in the chat, hopefully it copied and pasted correctly. Yes, our upcoming Online with the CMC. So March 18th, we're going to be covering Braille, decoding the dots. Again, our April session was moved up a week. So that's April 8th, mixing it up, mixed materials. And then on May 20th, Cheerios, Rice Krispies, or the Directory of Overseas Summer Jobs. And you can register for all those in L2 or through our CMC webpage. Nobody has any questions at all? Do any of you work with these sorts of materials, either on a regular basis or not? And do you want to share your experiences? Sherry says, I'm not sure I've ever seen books like you described. I was also wondering if any of our libraries have items like these. Yes, that's a good point too, Sherry. So is there anybody here that has any of these interesting items in their collections? And Sherry said, if you do, I'm jealous.
Me too.
Yeah. Heidi found some really good. Sarah says, I don't work with these materials anymore, but I used to work in the Newberry and did a lot of work with them. Okay. I bet you did. But yeah, Heidi found a lot of good examples to share too. So
if anybody thinks of any questions even later on too, feel free to email me. I'll put my email in the chat, or you can obviously email the whole CMC department.
Yep. If you don't have any, oops, Robert says, I guess a general rule would be to provide information, probably in a note, concerning the unusual nature of the book to help out other catalogers and searchers seeking to find the resource. Yeah, I think you could probably do maybe just a generic 500 for that. That's a good idea, Robert.
I agree. I think it can be really challenging, even for me as someone who has a lot of experience with artist book or oddly bound books, to kind of find the right vocabulary or even a controlled vocabulary. Right. So I completely agree with that. Adding just any sort of note to say something's strange about this or something's really unique about this. That way they're prepared.
Well, maybe even if you did a 520 and put that it was a, a tunnel book or flag book, or, you know what I mean? Use that to kind of describe it too. I don't think that would be wrong. Does anybody else have any other questions? If you don't have any other questions about this topic, then we can open it up for questions, just any general cataloging questions you might have. Everybody's so quiet today. All right, I'll give you another minute if you can think of any questions. And again, you can unmute yourself. It should be in the bottom left-hand side where the microphone is. You just click on that to unmute and you can ask a question that way, or you can type a question in the chat box. Don said, good, clear presentation. Thank you. All right. I guess if you have any other questions, you can either email the CMC or you can email Heidi directly. I want to thank all of you for attending, and hopefully you can attend our March one on Braille books. So thanks, everybody.